Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. It was another hot day at the Apex chemical manufacturing plant, and the large fans overhead did little to cool the production floor. He had been working at this same spot for 12 years now, operating mixing station number 7. Every day was almost the same. He would arrive at 6 in the morning, put on his safety gear and start mixing chemicals according to the instructions on his computer screen. Most people thought his job was simple. Press buttons, watch the machine mix, and move on to the next batch. But Marcus knew better. He had learned over the years that making industrial adhesive was more complicated than it looked. The thick, sticky substance his machine produced was used in everything from car parts to building materials. Companies all over the country depended on it being just right. Marcus was different from his co-workers in one important way. He paid attention to details that others ignored. While most workers just followed the steps and went home, Marcus noticed things. He saw patterns. He asked questions in his mind even when no one else seemed to care about the answers. It started about 6 months ago. Marcus noticed that every few batches something went wrong. The adhesive would come out too thin or too thick. When this happened, the whole batch had to be thrown away. Thousands of gallons of expensive chemicals went straight into the waste tanks. Marcus watched this happen again and again. At first, he thought it was random. Bad luck, maybe. But then he started to see a pattern. It was not every batch that failed. It was every third batch on some days and every fourth batch on other days. The engineers who walked around in their white coats and hard hats did not seem to notice. They blamed the old equipment. They said the machines were breaking down because they were too old. Marcus was not so sure. The machines seemed to work fine most of the time. Why would they suddenly fail in a pattern? That did not make sense to him. So he decided to do something that no one asked him to do. He started keeping notes. He bought a simple notebook from the store on his way home one evening. It had a blue cover and lined pages. The next day he brought it to work in his lunch bag. Whenever a batch failed, Marcus would write down the time, the temperature reading on the wall thermometer, and anything else he could think of. He wrote down if it was raining outside. He wrote down if the big delivery trucks had just arrived and opened the loading dock doors. He wrote down everything. His co-workers thought he was strange. "Why are you writing in that notebook all the time?" They asked him during lunch breaks. "Are you trying to be a manager or something?" They laughed, but not in a mean way. They just did not understand why Marcus cared so much about a job that paid by the hour. Marcus did not mind their jokes. He kept writing in his notebook every single day. After 2 months, he had filled the entire notebook. He bought a second one, this time with a red cover. He kept writing. The patterns became clearer in his mind. He noticed that the waste happened more often when the weather was humid. He noticed that it happened more in the summer than in the winter. He noticed that the factory floor felt different on the days when batches failed. The air felt heavier, thicker somehow. Marcus started writing down the humidity levels that were posted on the weather app on his phone. He wrote down the exact temperature inside the factory. He even started noting what time of day the problems happened most often. It was usually in the afternoon, between 2 and 4 o'clock, when the sun heated up the metal roof of the factory building. The engineers never asked Marcus what he thought. To them, he was just a machine operator. They had college degrees in chemistry and engineering. They had fancy computers and testing equipment. Why would they ask a factory worker with only a high school diploma what he thought about chemical formulas? But Marcus kept watching and writing. He filled his second notebook and started a third one. By now, he had created his own system. He drew charts and graphs on the pages. He was not trained in science or math beyond basic high school classes, but he knew how to spot patterns. He had always been good at puzzles, even as a child. One day, Marcus realized something important. The formula for the adhesive never changed. The machines followed the exact same steps every single time. They mixed the chemicals for the exact same amount of time, at the exact same speed, in the exact same order. But the temperature and humidity in the factory changed all the time. What if that mattered? What if the chemicals reacted differently when the air was hot and wet compared to when it was cool and dry? Marcus thought about this idea for many days. It made sense to him, but he was not sure if he was right. He was not a scientist. He was just a worker who paid attention. Still, the more he looked at his notebooks, the more convinced he became. The pattern was too clear to be coincidence. The problem was not the machines at all. The problem was that the formula did not account for the weather conditions inside the factory. The chemicals needed more time to mix properly when it was hot and humid. They needed less time when it was cool and dry. But the machines just followed the same instructions no matter what. Marcus wanted to tell someone about his discovery, but he was nervous. What if he was wrong? What if the engineers laughed at him? He had never spoken up in a meeting before. He always just did his job quietly and went home. His wife, Linda, always told him he should speak up more at work, but Marcus preferred to stay in the background. Still, he could not stop thinking about all the wasted adhesive. Every week, thousands of gallons went down the drain. He knew that waste cost the company a lot of money. He had heard managers talking about it during their meetings on the factory floor. They looked worried. Some workers had even been laid off last year because the company was losing money. Marcus looked at his 3 notebooks filled with data. He had spent 6 months collecting this information. Maybe it was time to show someone. Maybe someone would listen. He decided to wait for the right moment. He would keep watching and writing, and when the time came, he would find the courage to speak up. For now, Marcus went back to work at mixing station number 7. He pressed the buttons, watched the machines, and wrote in his notebook. Around him, the factory hummed with activity. Engineers walked past with their clipboards. Managers talked on their phones. Delivery trucks came and went, and every few batches more adhesive was wasted and poured into the waste tanks. Marcus knew he had found something important. Now he just needed to find the courage to tell someone who could actually do something about it. The morning started like any other Monday at Apex Chemical Manufacturing, but by noon everything had changed. Marcus noticed that more managers than usual were walking around the factory floor. They were not smiling. They gathered in small groups, whispering to each other and looking at papers on their tablets. Something was wrong. During lunch break, Marcus sat with his usual group of coworkers in the break room. Everyone was talking about the same thing. The company had released its quarterly earnings report over the weekend, and the news was bad. Very bad. My brother works in the office upstairs, said Tommy, one of the welders. He told me the company lost a lot of money last quarter. They might have to close one of the production lines. Maria, who worked at the packaging station, shook her head. I heard it is worse than that. They might close the whole factory if things do not get better soon. Marcus listened quietly while eating his sandwich. He had heard rumors like this before, but today felt different. The worried looks on the managers' faces were real. This was not just gossip. That afternoon, the plant manager, Mr. Robert Harrison, called an emergency meeting. All the workers had to stop what they were doing and gather in the main assembly area. This had only happened a few times before, and it was never good news. Mr. Harrison stood on a small platform so everyone could see him. He was a tall man with gray hair and a tired face. He had been with the company for 30 years. Today he looked older than usual. I want to be honest with you all, Mr. Harrison began. His voice was serious. The company is facing a crisis. Our waste costs have reached $8.3 million per year. That is money we are literally pouring down the drain. If we cannot fix this problem soon, we will have to make some very difficult decisions. The workers looked at each other nervously. $8 million in waste. That was a number too big for most of them to imagine. Marcus felt his heart beat faster. He had known the waste was bad, but he had not known it was that bad. Mr. Harrison continued. The corporate office has decided to bring in outside help. We have hired a consulting firm from New York City. They are experts in chemical manufacturing efficiency. They will be here starting next week to study our operations and find out what is going wrong. After the meeting ended, the factory floor was quiet. Usually workers talked and joked while they worked, but now everyone seemed lost in their own worried thoughts. Jobs were on the line. Families depended on these paychecks. The whole town depended on this factory. If it closed, many people would have nowhere else to go. Marcus went back to mixing station number 7. He thought about the 3 notebooks in his locker. He thought about all the patterns he had discovered. Should he say something now? But who would listen to him when the company was bringing in fancy consultants from New York City? The consultants arrived the following Monday. There were 5 of them, all wearing expensive suits and carrying leather briefcases. They had advanced degrees from famous universities. They set up an office in the conference room and started their work. For the next 3 months, the consultants were everywhere. They interviewed managers and engineers. They took samples of the adhesive and sent them to laboratories for testing. They brought in special cameras to record the production process. They built computer models and ran simulations. They measured everything that could be measured. Marcus watched them work. Sometimes they would come to his station and ask him basic questions about his job. How long have you worked here? Do you follow the instructions exactly? Have you noticed any problems with the equipment? Marcus answered their questions simply and honestly, but they never asked him what he really knew. They never asked to see his notebooks. The consultants treated the factory workers like they were part of the machinery. They were more interested in talking to the engineers and managers. After all, what could a machine operator possibly know about complex chemical processes? They had their degrees and their computer programs. They had worked with dozens of companies. They were the experts. Marcus continued his observations. He filled his fourth notebook. The patterns remained the same. Every time the humidity was high and the temperature was above 80 degrees, the waste increased. Every single time. It was so clear to him now that he could predict when a batch would fail just by looking at the weather and the clock. His co-workers had stopped joking about his notebooks. They had gotten used to seeing Marcus writing during his breaks. Some of them even asked him what he was tracking. Marcus showed them his charts and explained what he had found. A few workers nodded and said it made sense, but none of them thought to tell the consultants or the managers. That was not how things worked in a factory. Workers did their jobs. Managers and consultants solved problems. After 3 months, the consultants finally presented their findings. Another big meeting was called. This time, some people from corporate headquarters were there too, including the CEO of the entire company. The head consultant, a man named Dr. Richard Brennan, stood at the front with a large presentation on a screen behind him. After extensive analysis, Dr. Brennan said in a confident voice, "We have identified the root cause of your waste problem. Your equipment is simply too old. The mixing machines, the temperature controls, the timing mechanisms, all of it is outdated technology from 20 years ago. The solution is clear. You need to completely modernize your production line." He clicked to the next slide. It showed pictures of shiny new machines. "We recommend a full equipment upgrade. New mixing stations, new control systems, new everything. This will bring your facility up to current industry standards and eliminate the waste problem." Mr. Harrison raised his hand. "What will this cost?" Dr. Brennan smiled. "The total investment would be approximately $12 million. However, with the savings from reduced waste, the equipment would pay for itself in about 3 years. The room went silent. $12 million. That was an enormous amount of money. Marcus could see the CEO whispering with the other executives. They did not look happy, but they also looked like they had no choice. The consultants were the experts. They had fancy degrees and computer models. If they said the equipment needed to be replaced, then it must be true. Over the next 2 weeks, the board of directors met several times. Finally, they made their decision. They would approve the $12 million equipment upgrade. The work would begin in 6 months. In the meantime, they would have to let go of 50 workers to save money for the new equipment. The factory could not afford both the upgrade and a full workforce. When the announcement was made, many workers cried. 50 people would lose their jobs. 50 families would struggle. Some of these workers had been at the factory for decades. They had children in college. They had mortgages to pay. And now they would be unemployed because the company needed $12 million for new machines. Marcus felt sick to his stomach. He knew something that no one else seemed to know. The consultants were wrong. It was not the equipment. He was sure of it. But how could he speak up now? The decision had already been made. The board had approved it. The consultants had already been paid $50,000 for their report. Who would believe a factory worker with 3 notebooks over highly paid experts? That night, Marcus could not sleep. He lay in bed next to his wife Linda, staring at the ceiling. Linda could tell something was bothering him. "What is wrong?" she asked softly. Marcus told her everything. He told her about his notebooks, about the patterns he had discovered, about his theory that the problem was not the equipment but the formula timing. He told her that he believed the consultants were wrong and that the company was about to waste $12 million while 50 people lost their jobs. Linda was quiet for a moment. Then she took his hand. "Marcus, you have to tell someone. You have to speak up. What if you are right? But what if I am wrong?" Marcus said. "I am not a scientist. I am just a factory worker. Why would anyone listen to me? Because you might be the only one who can save those jobs, Linda said firmly. You have been watching and learning for months. Those consultants were only here for 3 months, and they never even talked to the workers who actually make the product every day. You owe it to your coworkers to try. Marcus knew his wife was right, but speaking up would be the hardest thing he had ever done. Tomorrow, he decided, he would find his courage. Marcus arrived at work earlier than usual the next morning. He had barely slept. In his locker, he kept all 4 of his notebooks, each one filled with months of careful observations. He looked at them for a long moment, then closed the locker door. Today was the day he would speak up, but he was not sure exactly when or how. The morning shift started normally. Marcus went to his station and began the day's work. But his mind was somewhere else. He kept rehearsing what he would say. How do you tell managers and engineers that they are making a $12 million mistake? How do you explain that a factory worker sees something that highly paid consultants missed? At 10 o'clock, Mr. Harrison announced a routine safety meeting. These meetings happened every month. Usually they were boring. Someone would talk about wearing safety goggles and not running on wet floors. Workers would nod politely and count the minutes until they could get back to work. But today, Marcus saw this meeting differently. It was a chance. All the supervisors would be there. Mr. Harrison would be there. At the end of every safety meeting, Mr. Harrison always asked the same question. Does anyone have any questions or concerns? Usually, no one said anything. Everyone just wanted to go back to work. Today would be different. Marcus sat in the back of the break room with about 40 other workers. Mr. Harrison stood at the front and went through the usual safety topics. Proper lifting techniques, chemical handling procedures, emergency exit locations. Marcus barely heard any of it. His heart was pounding. His hands felt sweaty. He had never been this nervous at work before. Finally, Mr. Harrison reached the end of his presentation. All right, that covers everything for this month, he said. Does anyone have any questions or concerns before we get back to work? The room was silent as always. Workers started to gather their things. Some were already standing up to leave. Marcus raised his hand. Everyone turned to look at him. In 12 years of working at the factory, Marcus had never raised his hand in a meeting, never asked a question, never drawn attention to himself. Now suddenly his hand was in the air and everyone was staring at him. Mr. Harrison looked surprised. Yes, Marcus. Do you have a question? Marcus stood up. His legs felt shaky, but he forced himself to speak. Mr. Harrison, I have something to say about the waste problem. I think the consultants might be wrong. The room became very quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. Some workers looked shocked. Others looked confused. Who was Marcus Chen to question the consultants? What could he possibly know that they did not? Mr. Harrison's expression was hard to read. He looked concerned but also curious. That is a serious statement, Marcus. What do you mean? Marcus took a deep breath. This was it. There was no going back now. I have been tracking the waste patterns for 6 months. I have 4 notebooks full of data. I do not think the problem is the equipment at all. I think the problem is that the formula does not adjust for temperature and humidity changes in the factory. Now people were really staring. Some workers whispered to each other. Marcus saw a few of the supervisors exchange glances. This was not how factory workers were supposed to behave. They were supposed to do their jobs, not challenge expensive consultants. But Mr. Harrison did not dismiss him. Instead, he stepped closer. You have been tracking this for 6 months? What exactly have you been tracking? Marcus felt a little more confident now. At least Mr. Harrison was listening. I write down every time a batch fails. I record the temperature inside the factory and the humidity level. I record what time of day it happens. I have found a clear pattern. The waste happens most often when it is hot and humid, especially in the afternoon. The machines follow the same timing every time, but the chemicals react differently in different conditions. One of the supervisors, a man named Jack Reynolds, spoke up. He did not sound friendly. Marcus, with all due respect, we just paid experts $50,000 to study this problem for 3 months. They used advanced computer models and laboratory analysis. Are you saying they got it wrong? Marcus met his eyes. Yes, sir. I think they did. They focused on the equipment, but they never really looked at how the environment affects the chemical reactions. I watch the mixing process every single day. I see patterns that someone who is only here for a few months might miss. Another supervisor jumped in. Do you have any training in chemistry or engineering? Any formal education beyond high school? No, sir, Marcus admitted. I only finished high school. But I know how to observe and collect data. I know how to see patterns. And the pattern is very clear in my notebooks. Mr. Harrison held up his hand to stop the other supervisors from asking more questions. He looked thoughtful. Marcus, I appreciate you speaking up. That took courage. But you have to understand our position. The board has already approved the equipment upgrade based on the consultant's recommendations. These are people with PhD degrees and decades of experience. We cannot just ignore their advice because of some notebooks. Marcus felt his courage starting to fade, but then he thought about the 50 workers who would lose their jobs. He thought about his wife's words last night. He had to try harder. Mr. Harrison, could I at least show someone my data? Maybe one of the engineers could look at it? The company is about to spend $12 million. What if there is even a small chance that I am right? Is it not worth having someone check? The room was silent again. Marcus could see Mr. Harrison thinking. The plant manager was a fair man, and Marcus could see the wheels turning in his mind. Finally, Mr. Harrison nodded slowly. All right, Marcus. I will tell you what. Dr. Sarah Martinez is our chief chemist. She has a PhD in chemical engineering and has been with this company for 15 years. I will ask her to look at your notebooks. If she thinks there is anything to your theory, we will investigate further. But I am not making any promises. The consultants were very thorough, and I am sure they are right. Still, it cannot hurt to have Dr. Martinez take a look. Fair enough? Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. Someone was going to look at his work. That was all he could ask for. Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. That is all I wanted. The meeting ended and workers filed out of the break room. Some patted Marcus on the shoulder as they passed. Others avoided his eyes. Marcus knew that some people thought he was foolish to speak up. Others probably thought he was just trying to get attention or maybe even trying to get promoted. But Marcus did not care what people thought. He had done what he needed to do. Now it was out of his hands. Later that afternoon, Marcus was called to Mr. Harrison's office. When he arrived, he found Mr. Harrison sitting behind his desk with a woman Marcus recognized but had never met personally. Dr. Sarah Martinez was in her mid-40s with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore a white lab coat over her regular clothes and had a friendly but serious expression. Marcus, this is Dr. Martinez, Mr. Harrison said. I have told her about your theory. She has agreed to review your notebooks this weekend. Can you bring them to her office before you leave today? Yes, sir, Marcus said. He felt nervous again. What if Dr. Martinez thought his data was meaningless? What if she laughed at his simple charts and observations? Dr. Martinez must have sensed his worry because she smiled at him. Marcus, I want you to know that I take your concerns seriously. Mr. Harrison tells me you have been very thorough in your observations. I'm actually impressed that you took the initiative to collect data on your own. Not many people would do that. Marcus felt a little better. Thank you, Dr. Martinez. I just want to help. I see the waste every day and it bothers me. That is exactly the kind of attitude we need more of, Dr. Martinez said. I will look at your notebooks carefully this weekend. I promise you that. If there is something there, I will find it. Marcus returned to his station for the rest of the day, but he could barely focus on his work. He kept thinking about Dr. Martinez reading his notebooks. What would she think? Would she see the patterns he saw? Or would she decide he was just a factory worker who did not understand the science? At the end of his shift, Marcus went to his locker and pulled out all 4 notebooks. He had read through them so many times that some of the pages were worn. He knew every chart, every note, every observation by heart. These notebooks represented 6 months of his life. 6 months of paying attention when everyone else looked away. 6 months of caring about something that no one asked him to care about. He walked to Dr. Martinez's office on the 2nd floor. He had never been to this part of the building before. The walls were white and clean, very different from the factory floor. Dr. Martinez's office had a window that looked out over the production area. She could see mixing station number 7 from here. Dr. Martinez took the notebooks from him carefully, as if they were valuable. Thank you, Marcus. I will read every page. I will call you on Monday with my thoughts. Try to have a good weekend and do not worry too much. Marcus nodded and left. As he walked to his car in the parking lot, he felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that he had finally spoken up. Fear that he might be wrong. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he had found something that could save jobs and save the company millions of dollars. The weekend was the longest of Marcus's life. He tried to relax, but he could not stop thinking about Dr. Martinez reading his notebooks. On Saturday, he cleaned his garage. On Sunday, he went to church with Linda and tried to focus on the sermon. But his mind kept drifting back to those notebooks and to Dr. Martinez's office. Monday morning arrived. Marcus went to work as usual, but every few minutes he glanced at his phone, hoping for a call. The morning passed slowly. Then lunch came and went. Still no call. Finally, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, his phone rang. It was Dr. Martinez. Marcus's hand shook as he answered. Hello? Marcus. Dr. Martinez's voice sounded different, excited. Can you come to my office right away? We need to talk. Marcus practically ran to Dr. Martinez's office. His supervisor looked confused when Marcus asked for permission to leave his station. But when Marcus mentioned Dr. Martinez had called, the supervisor waved him away. Everyone in the factory had heard about Marcus speaking up in the meeting last week. Some people were calling him brave. Others were calling him foolish. When Marcus reached the office, Dr. Martinez opened the door before he could even knock. Her eyes were bright with excitement, and Marcus's 4 notebooks were spread across her desk, along with papers covered in mathematical formulas and chemical equations. Sit down. Marcus, she said, pulling out a chair for him. I spent the entire weekend going through your notebooks. Then I spent all of Sunday night and this morning running tests and calculations. Marcus, you were absolutely right. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. I was right? Are you sure? Dr. Martinez nodded, a huge smile on her face. Not only were you right, but you discovered something that I should have noticed years ago. I am actually embarrassed that it took a machine operator to figure this out instead of someone in my department. She picked up one of his notebooks and opened it to a page filled with Marcus's handwritten charts. Look at this. Your data collection is excellent. You recorded everything that mattered, and you did it consistently over 6 months. That is better than most research studies I have seen. You identified a clear correlation between humidity, temperature, and batch failures. The pattern is undeniable. Marcus leaned forward. So it really is the environmental conditions that cause the waste? Exactly, Dr. Martinez said. She stood up and walked to a whiteboard on her wall. She drew a simple diagram as she explained. Our adhesive formula involves a chemical reaction that is very sensitive to temperature and humidity. When chemicals react, they need a certain amount of time to bond properly, but that time changes depending on the conditions around them. She drew some arrows on her diagram. Think of it like baking a cake. If your oven is hotter, the cake bakes faster. If it is cooler, it takes longer. The same principle applies to chemical reactions. When the factory is hot and humid, the molecules move faster and react quicker. When it is cool and dry, they move slower and take more time. Marcus nodded. This made perfect sense. But our machines use the same mixing time no matter what the conditions are. Exactly right, Dr. Martinez said. The consultants were so focused on the equipment that they never considered this. They assumed that if we followed the formula exactly, we would get consistent results. But they forgot that chemistry is not just about following steps. It is about understanding how molecules behave in different environments. She returned to her desk and pulled out some papers. I ran the numbers this morning. Based on your observations, I created a new formula. Well, not really a new formula. The same formula, but with adjustments for environmental conditions. It is actually quite simple. Dr. Martinez showed Marcus a single page with a calculation on it. All we need to do is adjust the mixing time based on the current temperature and humidity. When it is hot and humid, we reduce the mixing time by a few seconds. When it is cool and dry, we increase it by a few seconds. That is it. No new equipment needed. No $12 million investment. Just a simple adjustment that takes environmental conditions into account. Marcus stared at the paper. Could it really be this simple? After all the consultants and all their analysis, the solution was just to adjust the timing based on the weather? I know what you're thinking, Dr. Martinez said. It seems too simple to be true. But sometimes the best solutions are simple. The consultants made it complicated because they assumed the problem must be complicated. They were looking for a complex answer when a simple one was right in front of them. What do we do now? Marcus asked. Dr. Martinez looked serious. Now comes the hard part. We need to convince Mr. Harrison and the board that we should try this before spending $12 million on new equipment. They have already committed to the upgrade. They have already decided to lay off 50 workers. Changing their minds will not be easy. She picked up her phone. But we have to try. Let me call Mr. Harrison right now. Marcus sat quietly while Dr. Martinez made the call. He could only hear her side of the conversation, but it was clear that Mr. Harrison was skeptical at first. Dr. Martinez explained everything patiently. She talked about the data, the chemical principles, and the proposed solution. She emphasized that it would cost almost nothing to test this theory. Finally, she hung up. He wants to meet with both of us tomorrow morning. He is bringing the chief operating officer and the head of production. They want to hear everything. That night, Marcus could barely eat dinner. Linda kept asking him what was wrong, and finally he told her everything. She hugged him tight and said, "I am so proud of you. No matter what happens tomorrow, you did the right thing by speaking up." The next morning, Marcus wore his best shirt to work. He met Dr. Martinez outside the conference room at 8 o'clock. Inside, Mr. Harrison was waiting with 3 other executives. They all looked serious and a little impatient. "All right, Dr. Martinez," Mr. Harrison said. "We are all very busy, so let us get straight to the point. You say Marcus has discovered something that the consultants missed?" Dr. Martinez stood up and presented everything clearly and professionally. She showed Marcus's data. She explained the science behind it. She showed her calculations. She proposed a simple test. Implement the timing adjustments for 2 weeks and measure the results. If it did not work, they would proceed with the equipment upgrade as planned. If it did work, they could save $12 million and keep all the workers employed. The executives asked many questions. Marcus was afraid to speak, but when they asked him directly about his observations, he answered honestly and clearly. He explained how he had noticed the patterns and why he had kept such detailed records. Finally, the chief operating officer, a stern woman named Mrs. Patricia Vaughn, spoke up. "Let me get this straight. We paid consultants $50,000 to tell us we need $12 million in new equipment. Now you are saying a factory worker with some notebooks has a better solution that costs almost nothing?" There was an awkward silence. Marcus felt his face turn red. Mrs. Vaughn's tone made it sound ridiculous when she said it that way, but Dr. Martinez did not back down. "With respect, Mrs. Vaughn, that is exactly what I am saying. The consultants were looking at the wrong problem. Marcus was looking at the right problem because he is there on the floor every single day. He sees what happens in real time. The consultants only visited for a few hours at a time. They never worked a full shift. They never felt how the factory conditions changed throughout the day." Mrs. Vaughn looked at Mr. Harrison. "What do you think, Robert?" Mr. Harrison rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I think Dr. Martinez makes a good point. We have nothing to lose by testing this for 2 weeks. If Marcus is wrong, we are only delayed by 2 weeks. If he is right, we save a fortune and keep our workers employed. It seems like a smart gamble to me." The executives discussed among themselves for a few minutes. Then Mrs. Vaughn nodded. "All right. We will approve a 2-week test. Dr. Martinez, you will implement Marcus's adjustment formula at all mixing stations. We will measure waste levels daily. If we see significant improvement, we will postpone the equipment upgrade and the layoffs. If we see no improvement, we proceed as planned." "Agreed?" Everyone nodded. The meeting was over. As Marcus walked back to the factory floor, he felt dizzy. This was really happening. His idea was going to be tested. In 2 weeks, everyone would know if he was right or wrong. Dr. Martinez worked quickly. She created a simple chart for each mixing station that showed the correct timing adjustments based on current temperature and humidity levels. She trained all the machine operators on how to use it. The adjustment was so simple that it only took 15 minutes to learn. She also installed basic environmental sensors at each station, so workers could see the exact temperature and humidity in real time. These sensors cost less than $200 total, a tiny fraction of $12 million. The test began on a Monday morning. Marcus was more nervous than he had ever been in his life. What if he was wrong? What if the waste continued? 50 people would lose their jobs, and it would be partly his fault for delaying the equipment upgrade. But Marcus followed the adjustment chart exactly. When the temperature was 82 degrees and the humidity was 70%, the chart told him to reduce mixing time by 4 seconds. He did exactly that. The batch came out perfect. Throughout the day, Marcus and all the other operators followed the charts. They adjusted their timing based on the conditions. At the end of the first day, Dr. Martinez came to the factory floor to check the results. She looked at the waste reports and her eyes went wide. "Waste is down 35%, she announced. In just one day. Marcus felt a wave of relief, but he knew one day was not enough. They needed consistent results over 2 weeks. The second day was even better. Waste was down 40%. The third day, 45%. By the end of the first week, waste had dropped by an average of 73%. The factory floor buzzed with excitement. Workers who had thought Marcus was crazy were now shaking his hand. The operators loved the new system because it was simple and it worked. They could see the difference immediately. Mr. Harrison visited the factory floor several times that week. He watched the operators using the adjustment charts. He saw the waste numbers dropping day after day. He spoke to Marcus personally. "Marcus, I owe you an apology," Mr. Harrison said. "I should have listened more carefully to the people who work on this floor every day. You all see things that those of us in offices miss. Thank you for having the courage to speak up." By the end of 2 weeks, the results were undeniable. Waste had dropped by an average of 73%. If this continued, the company would save over $6 million in the first year alone. The $12 million equipment upgrade was no longer necessary. The 50 layoffs were canceled. Everyone kept their jobs. The board of directors called an emergency meeting to review the results. They were shocked and impressed. They officially canceled the equipment purchase and instead gave Marcus a promotion and a $50,000 bonus for his discovery. The news about Marcus's discovery spread through the factory like wildfire. Workers who had been terrified about losing their jobs were now celebrating. The break room was filled with laughter and relief. People who had barely spoken to Marcus before now stopped him in the hallways to thank him. He had saved their jobs, their livelihoods, their ability to feed their families, but the impact went far beyond just the factory floor. Within 3 months, the waste reduction from Marcus's adjustment formula had saved Apex Chemical over $6 million. The company's quarterly earnings report went from terrible to impressive. The stock price went up. Investors were happy. The CEO sent out a company-wide email praising the innovation that had saved the company. Marcus received his $50,000 bonus at a special ceremony in the factory cafeteria. All the workers attended, along with executives from corporate headquarters. When Mr. Harrison handed Marcus the check, the entire room stood up and applauded. Marcus felt tears in his eyes. He had never imagined that paying attention and keeping notebooks would lead to this moment, but the bonus was just the beginning. Mrs. Patricia Vaughn, the chief operating officer who had been skeptical at first, pulled Marcus aside after the ceremony. "Marcus, I want to apologize for doubting you," she said. "You taught us an important lesson. We had forgotten to listen to the people who actually do the work every day. We want to make sure that never happens again." She explained that the company was creating a new position, production quality analyst. The person in this role would work with both factory workers and engineers to identify problems and find solutions. They wanted Marcus to take this job. Marcus was shocked. "But I do not have a college degree. I have only worked a machine my whole career." Mrs. Vaughn smiled. "You have something more valuable than a degree. You have 12 years of experience. You know how to observe and collect data, and you care about making things better. That is exactly what we need. We will provide training for anything else you need to learn. What do you say?" Marcus thought about it for only a moment before saying yes. The new job came with a substantial raise, bringing his salary up to almost double what he had been making. But more important than the money was the opportunity. He would now have a voice in how the factory operated. He could help prevent problems before they became crises. His new office was small but had a window overlooking the production floor. He could see mixing station number 7 from his desk, the same station where he had worked for 12 years. It felt strange at first to wear business casual clothes instead of his factory uniform, but Marcus adjusted quickly. Dr. Martinez became his mentor, teaching him more about chemistry and engineering. She showed him how to run proper experiments and how to analyze data scientifically. Marcus was a quick learner. What he lacked in formal education, he made up for with curiosity and determination. Together, Marcus and Dr. Martinez started looking at other areas of production. If the timing adjustment had worked for the adhesive, could similar principles apply to other products? They discovered that the answer was yes. Over the next several months, they made adjustments to 3 other production processes, each time reducing waste and improving efficiency. But the real change at Apex Chemical went beyond just the savings. The company culture was transforming. Management started asking workers for their input on a regular basis. They created a suggestion program where any employee could submit ideas for improvements. Many of these suggestions came from people who, like Marcus, had been quietly observing problems for years, but had never felt comfortable speaking up. One of the first suggestions came from Maria, the packaging operator who had sat at Marcus's lunch table that day when the crisis was announced. She had noticed that the packaging line wasted a lot of cardboard because the boxes were cut slightly too large. A simple adjustment to the cutting machine could save thousands of dollars per year in material costs. Her suggestion was implemented immediately, and she received a bonus of $5,000. Tommy, the welder, pointed out that the welding stations were arranged inefficiently, forcing workers to walk back and forth unnecessarily. Rearranging the stations would save time and reduce worker fatigue. His suggestion was also implemented. Suddenly, workers who had felt invisible were being heard. People who had been doing the same job for decades were realizing that their experience and observations had value. The company began to see its factory workers not just as pairs of hands, but as thinking, observing people with important insights. Marcus's story also spread beyond Apex Chemical. A reporter from the local newspaper heard about what had happened and wrote a feature article about the factory worker who saved millions. The article was picked up by a business magazine, then by a national news website. Before long, Marcus was getting interview requests from journalists all over the country. He was invited to speak at a manufacturing conference in Chicago. Marcus had never given a speech to a large audience before, and he was terrified, but Linda encouraged him to accept. "People need to hear your story," she said. "You can inspire others." The conference had over 500 attendees, mostly managers and executives from manufacturing companies across the country. Marcus stood on stage in front of all these successful, educated people and told his story. He talked about his notebooks, about the patterns he had noticed, about having the courage to speak up even though he was afraid. When he finished, the audience gave him a standing ovation. During the question and answer session, many people asked the same basic question: how could companies encourage more workers to speak up like Marcus had? Marcus's answer was simple: listen to the people who do the work. They see things that people in offices cannot see. Create a culture where it is safe to share observations and ideas. Do not make workers feel like they are just machines. We are human beings who think and notice and care. Give us a chance to contribute. His speech was so well received that other conferences started inviting him. Over the next year, Marcus spoke at 8 different industry events. He became known as an advocate for empowering frontline workers. Business schools started teaching his story as a case study in innovation and organizational culture. The consulting firm that had recommended the $12 million equipment upgrade heard about Marcus's success. At first, they tried to downplay it, suggesting that their analysis was still valid and that equipment upgrades would have worked too. But quietly, they began changing their approach. They started interviewing frontline workers as part of their assessment process, realizing that these employees often had insights that traditional analysis missed. Back at Apex Chemical, Marcus built a team of 12 analysts, all promoted from production roles like he had been. There was a former packaging operator, a maintenance technician, a quality inspector, and others. Together, they continuously looked for ways to improve operations. They did not just focus on problems. They looked for opportunities to make things better in any way possible. One of Marcus's team members, a woman named Jennifer who had worked in shipping for 15 years, discovered that the company was paying too much for freight because they were not optimizing their delivery routes. Her analysis saved the company $200,000 per year in transportation costs. Another team member, David, who had been a maintenance worker, noticed that machines were breaking down more often than they should. He traced the problem to a specific supplier who was providing substandard replacement parts. Switching suppliers improved machine reliability and reduced downtime significantly. Every success story reinforced the lesson that Marcus had taught. People who do the work often know best how to improve it. After 3 years, the cumulative savings from Marcus's original discovery and his team's ongoing improvements exceeded $20 million. This was far more than the cost of the equipment upgrade that had never happened. The 50 workers who had been scheduled for layoff still had their jobs. Some of them had even been promoted or received raises as the company became more profitable. Marcus remained humble through all of this. He still ate lunch in the cafeteria with his old co-workers. He still remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to have ideas but be afraid to share them. He made it a point to visit the factory floor at least once a week, talking to operators and asking them what they were observing. On one of these visits, a young machine operator named Kevin approached him nervously. "Mr. Chen, I have been noticing something about the cooling system. I have been keeping some notes, but I am not sure if it is important." Marcus smiled. He recognized the uncertainty in Kevin's voice. He remembered feeling the same way when he first started his notebooks. "Show me your notes," Marcus said. "Even if it turns out to be nothing, I want to see them." Observation and curiosity should always be encouraged. As he looked through Kevin's carefully written notes, Marcus felt proud. The culture had truly changed. Workers were no longer afraid to pay attention and speak up. They knew their observations mattered. They knew they could make a difference. That evening, Marcus went home to Linda and told her about Kevin. "There are probably dozens of people in that factory right now who are noticing things and keeping their own notebooks. We created something bigger than just saving money. We showed people that their voices matter." Linda hugged him. "You did that, Marcus. You started it all by having the courage to raise your hand in that meeting. You changed everything." Marcus thought back to that day 3 years ago when he had stood up in the safety meeting, his hand shaking, his heart pounding. It had been the scariest moment of his career, but it had also been the most important. One moment of courage had changed the trajectory of hundreds of lives. The story of Marcus Chen became famous in business circles as an example of bottom-up innovation. His journey from factory floor to analyst inspired similar programs at companies around the world. Manufacturers began to realize that their greatest untapped resource was not new equipment or expensive consultants, but the knowledge and insights of the people who showed up every day to do the work. And it all started with one man who decided to pay attention, to keep notebooks, and to find the courage to speak up when it mattered most. 5 years after Marcus first raised his hand in that safety meeting, Apex Chemical Manufacturing looked completely different, not in the physical sense. The building was still the same. The machines were still the original equipment that the consultants had wanted to replace, but everything about how the company operated had transformed. The factory had become famous in the manufacturing world. Business magazines wrote articles about it. University professors brought students on tours to see how a culture of worker empowerment actually worked in practice. Other companies sent their executives to learn from Apex's example. Marcus now led a department of 25 people, all of whom had been promoted from frontline positions. His title was Director of Continuous Improvement, and his job was to help the company constantly find new ways to work better, faster, and smarter. But he never let the title go to his head. He still remembered being the quiet machine operator that no one paid attention to. The original 4 notebooks that Marcus had kept were now displayed in the company lobby, preserved in glass cases like museum artifacts. Beside them was a plaque that read, "These notebooks represent the power of observation, persistence, and courage. They remind us that innovation can come from anyone, anywhere in our organization." Every new employee at Apex Chemical, from executives to entry-level workers, was shown these notebooks during their orientation. They were told Marcus's story, and the message was clear. Your observations matter. Your ideas matter. You matter. The financial impact of Marcus's discovery had been enormous. The original timing adjustment formula continued to save the company approximately $6 million per year. Over 5 years, that alone was $30 million in savings. But the ripple effects were even larger. The culture change that Marcus had sparked led to hundreds of other improvements, large and small, that collectively saved the company another $20 million. Apex Chemical had gone from being on the edge of closing a factory and laying off workers to being one of the most profitable chemical manufacturers in the region. The company had hired 300 new workers in the past 5 years. They had opened a second production facility in a neighboring state. They had won industry awards for innovation and workplace culture, and none of it would have happened without Marcus's notebooks and his moment of courage. But Marcus's influence extended far beyond Apex Chemical. His story had inspired a movement in the manufacturing industry. Companies across the country were creating programs to encourage worker input and observation. Some called them operator innovation programs. Others called them frontline intelligence teams, but they all traced their inspiration back to Marcus. Chen in his notebooks. Marcus was invited to speak at a major industry conference in Las Vegas. This was not like the small conferences he had spoken at before. This event had 3,000 attendees from manufacturing companies around the world. He was scheduled to give the keynote speech on the main stage. The night before his speech, Marcus could not sleep. Even after 5 years of public speaking, addressing 3,000 people still made him nervous. Linda had come with him to Las Vegas, and she found him sitting by the window of their hotel room at 2 a.m, staring out at the bright lights of the city. "Still nervous?" she asked, sitting beside him. Marcus nodded. "I keep thinking about that young man I met last week. Kevin, the operator who showed me his notes 3 years ago. Do you know what he told me?" Linda shook her head. "He said that my story changed his life. He said that before he heard about me, he thought he would just be a machine operator forever, that his job was just to follow instructions and not ask questions. But after hearing my story, he started paying attention and keeping notes just like I did. Now he is being promoted to team lead, and he is encouraging other young workers to observe and speak up. He said I inspired him." Marcus's voice caught with emotion. "That is when I realized something, Linda. This is not about me anymore. It is about showing people that they have power they did not know they had. It is about changing how workers see themselves." Linda took his hand. "That is exactly what you should talk about tomorrow. Not just the money you saved or the formula you discovered. Talk about what it means to find your voice. Talk about what happens when people realize they matter." The next day, Marcus walked onto that stage in front of 3,000 people. The lights were bright and the crowd was huge, but Marcus was no longer nervous. He knew exactly what he wanted to say. He told his story from the beginning. The 12 years of operating the same machine, the patterns he noticed, the notebooks he kept, the fear he felt about speaking up, the moment he raised his hand in that meeting. But then he talked about what happened after. He talked about the workers who found their voices because his story gave them courage. He talked about Maria and her packaging suggestion, Tommy and his welding station idea, Kevin and his cooling system observations. He talked about the hundreds of improvements that came from ordinary workers who realized their observations had value. "I am not special," Marcus told the audience. "I am just someone who paid attention. And you know what I have learned? There are people like me in every factory, every warehouse, every production facility in the world. They are paying attention right now. They are noticing things. They are seeing patterns, but many of them are staying quiet because they do not think anyone will listen." He paused and looked out at the thousands of faces watching him. "If you are a manager or an executive, I have a challenge for you. Go back to your company and find those people. Create a culture where it is safe to speak up. Listen to the workers who actually do the work every day. They know things that you do not know. They see things that you cannot see from an office." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. "And if you are a frontline worker, someone who operates a machine or drives a truck or works in a warehouse, I have a message for you too. Start paying attention. Keep your own notebooks. Trust your observations. And when you see something that could be better, find the courage to speak up. Your voice matters. Your ideas matter. You have the power to change things." When Marcus finished his speech, the entire auditorium erupted in applause. People stood up. Some had tears in their eyes. The applause went on for several minutes. After the speech, hundreds of people lined up to talk to Marcus. Executives wanted to know how to implement similar programs at their companies. Workers wanted to tell him their own stories of observations they had made but been afraid to share. Marcus spent 3 hours talking to people, answering questions, and encouraging them to trust their instincts. One young woman, a machine operator from Ohio, told Marcus she had been keeping notebooks about efficiency issues at her plant for 2 years, but had never shown them to anyone. "I thought I would sound stupid if I said anything," she admitted. Marcus handed her one of his business cards. "Show your notebooks to someone in management. Tell them your story, and if they do not listen, keep trying until someone does. The world needs people like you who pay attention." Years continued to pass. Marcus's children grew up hearing their father's story so many times that they could recite it by heart. His daughter, Sophie, decided to study engineering in college. because she was inspired by how her father had solved a complex technical problem without any formal training. His son James wrote a paper about his father for a high school assignment on everyday heroes. Marcus's hair started turning gray, but he never lost his enthusiasm for finding better ways to do things. He still walked the factory floor at least once a week. He still talked to operators and asked them what they were observing. And he still kept a notebook in his pocket because old habits die hard. One day, 10 years after his original discovery, Marcus was walking through the factory when he saw a young operator at mixing station number 7, his old station. The young man was writing in a small notebook during his break. Marcus walked over and smiled. "What are you writing about?" The young operator looked up, his eyes widening when he recognized Marcus. Everyone at Apex Chemical knew who Marcus Chen was. "Mr. Chen? I'm just keeping some notes about the mixing process. I think I notice a pattern with the seasonal changes, how the formula might need different adjustments in winter versus summer, but I am probably wrong. I'm still pretty new here." Marcus's heart swelled with pride. This young man was doing exactly what Marcus had done all those years ago. The cycle was continuing. The culture of observation and speaking up was so embedded now that new workers did it naturally, without even being asked. "You are not wrong," Marcus said. "Keep watching. Keep writing. And when you are ready, share what you have found. That is how progress happens." As Marcus walked back to his office, he thought about how far things had come. That scared moment in the safety meeting 10 years ago had created ripples that were still spreading. Workers at Apex Chemical no longer saw themselves as just pairs of hands. They saw themselves as thinkers, observers, problem solvers. The company continued to thrive. More improvements were made every year. More workers found their voices. More lives were changed. And it all traced back to those 4 notebooks and 1 moment of courage. Marcus retired from Apex Chemical at the age of 55. Much earlier than most people retire. But he had saved enough money from his bonuses and salary increases, and he wanted to spend time doing something different. He started a consulting business, but not the kind that charged $50,000 to recommend equipment upgrades. Marcus's consulting business helped companies learn how to listen to their workers. He traveled to factories across the country, teaching managers how to create cultures of empowerment. He ran workshops for frontline workers, encouraging them to trust their observations and find their voices. He helped dozens of companies create their own operator innovation programs, but his favorite thing to do was visit high schools and talk to students who thought they did not need college to make a difference in the world. He told them his story and showed them that education comes in many forms. Observation is education. Experience is education. Paying attention is education. "I only finished high school," he would tell these students, "but I learned something valuable. You do not need a degree to think. You do not need a title to observe. You do not need permission to care about doing things better. What you need is curiosity, persistence, and courage." Many years later, when Marcus was an old man, a documentary filmmaker made a movie about his life called The Notebook. It told his story and included interviews with dozens of workers whose lives had been changed by his example. The film was shown at film festivals and won several awards. Schools used it to teach students about innovation and workplace culture. Marcus watched the film at its premiere, sitting next to Linda, who had been by his side through everything. As he watched his younger self on screen, raising his hand in that safety meeting, Marcus remembered how afraid he had been in that moment, how his hands had shaken, how his voice had cracked, but he also remembered what happened next, how speaking up had changed everything, how one voice could start a revolution, how paying attention could save millions of dollars and hundreds of jobs, how an ordinary person could do extraordinary things. The film ended with a shot of Marcus's original notebooks in their glass cases at Apex Chemical. The final words on screen read, "These notebooks changed one company. The lesson they taught changed an industry. The courage they represent can change the world." As the credits rolled and the audience applauded, Marcus smiled. He had started as a machine operator that no one noticed. He had become a voice for workers everywhere who deserved to be heard. And his legacy would live on in every factory worker who kept a notebook, observed patterns, and found the courage to speak up. The story of Marcus Chen proved something important. Innovation does not always come from laboratories or boardrooms or consulting firms. Sometimes it comes from the person standing at a machine, paying attention while everyone else is looking away. Sometimes it comes from someone brave enough to raise their hand and say, "I think I might know something useful." And sometimes that one moment of courage changes everything.